over the past few weeks, we've seen many activists and many people from opposition parties being abducted in Zimbabwe. And this Saturday, we've seen Peter Mogombea being abducted as well. But this has been seen as a gross human rights violation. Welcome to Know Your Right. I'm joined by Brian Robi from Tanaka Law Chambers. Brian, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Brighton.
Now, Brian, let's talk about this abduction of Peter Mogombea. What happened?
Well, there are allegations that the Zimbabwe Hospital Doctors Association president was abducted on the 15th, I guess. And for sure, if that is true, the position of the law is that, or my first reaction rather to it is that we condemn and we frown upon such behavior, and even the international community condemns such behavior if you look at the Convention on Forced Disappearance.
But now, Robi, if someone demands proper living conditions from the government and they disappear, how do you talk about such issues when someone demands their rights, someone demands something that they're eligible to, they're entitled to, and then they disappear? How do we now say we're in a new dispensation with democracy?
Okay, I guess my duty is to speak to the issues around the human rights violations around that aspect, and of which the starting point should be, you look at Section 44 of our Constitution, it imposes a duty on the state that the state should protect its citizens. Before we even look at the profession or the trade or the area of specialization for that individual, the state has a duty, a constitutional duty, that is to protect and respect and promote the rights of its citizens.
But however, when citizens are now disappearing and being adopted by the state, which is supposed to protect them and also to be accountable before the citizens, how do you say now our constitution is being respected and abided by it?
Every right comes with a duty bearer. And in this case, the state has a constitutional obligation, like I've pointed it out already, that it should protect its citizens. Despite whoever, it has a duty. If you read verbatim Section 44 there, it says a duty to respect fundamental human rights. The state right, that's the first duty bearer in this context. And then every person, including juristic persons and every institution and agents of the government and at every level, must respect, protect, promote, and fulfill rights and freedoms set out in this chapter. That's the Bill of Rights.
But now, also, if we go to the rights to health.
A right to health, yeah, it's enshrined in Section 76, I suppose. Still, it's within the Bill of Rights. Okay.
But still talking about Section 76, we have now, the doctors have down tools. But now, how does that affect the citizens who are now in hospitals, now in bed, say, we have a right to health, but now no one is looking after us?
In the affirmative, it does have widespread effects upon the citizens, because doctors striking or downing their tools has a direct effect of the right that you are citing, the right to health care. That's Section 56 as it reads. Every citizen and permanent resident of Zimbabwe has the right to have access to basic health care services. That's the first thing. So what it means is, once the doctors protest, like the prevailing situation right now, where they are saying they are not going to go back to work until their president has been released, what it means is generally the right to basic health care of all the individuals, of all the patients, is affected in that regard.
But now the government came out saying the third force behind these adoptions. In terms of constitutional legal perspective, do you think the third force, who is this third force?
Now, it's difficult to allege without bringing evidence, without putting forward evidence. So in this kind of situation, the state has not owned up responsibility. It has not assumed responsibility for the adoption of Peter Mogombea, right? So at the end of the day, evidence is needed to say it's the state. We can't put solely the blame. Only what we can do is to speculate around it, right? Then However, the law always speaks to those issues, I suppose. If we or if anyone has a reasonable belief that the state has are responsible or are behind this adoption, what they need to do is to act in terms of Section 50. It should be subsection 7, which entitles anyone to apply to the High Court for an order of habeas corpus, which simply means they have the body. Right? If you have that order being granted by the High Court, then it empowers the police, right, and other relevant state agencies to do what is within their powers to make sure that the whereabouts of Peter, Dr. Peter Makombe, are indeed ascertained.
So yesterday we saw there was International Democracy Day yesterday, but however today we are seeing now the doctors protesting, and then they're walking to, so videos of them walking to Mnumtaba building to appear before the president of Zimbabwe. But however the riot police blocked them. So can you say there's democracy here in Zimbabwe in terms of I want to they're demanding their right, and they're demanding someone who has been abducted by the state force, but now the police are blocking them from meeting the president. How do you gauge now our democracy now in Zimbabwe?
Then it goes back to one of the topics or the debates that we always had, that in terms of the constitution, if you want to speak from a black and white point of view or perspective, there isn't it democracy. That's my belief, because the constitution is rich enough. The constitution has entitlements, rights and liberties that indeed reflect a democratic society. But it comes now it goes back to my aspect of duty bearers, whether those duty bearers are willing to observe the human rights, to realize, respect, promote, fulfill the human rights of the individuals. However, the right to petition is there, it's constitutionally guaranteed. Freedom of expression is also another fundamental human right that is also guaranteed by the Constitution. However, the political will to enforce the same is also relevant, is also important, in as much as we have it on the paper, in as much as our Constitution is a transformative document, but are the duty bearers willing to respect and enforce the same? So I don't know whether I'm responding to your question in that regard, but they do have those entitlements at law. They do have those liberties at law. However, it becomes a violation when the state agencies, right, do limit those rights, as long as that limitation is not within the law. If you look at Section 86 of the Constitution somewhere, it provides for instances where those human rights can be limited. It's a limitation clause. It provides a situation whereby you can say this is in terms of the law. We can limit your right to do 1, 2, 3, but that kind of limitation is within the law. Therefore, such limitation will be lawful. However, anything outside that kind of limitation is unlawful, whether it's being perpetrated by state agents, by the police, by the Zimbabwe National Army, by whoever, but as long as it is not spelled within the law, then they're acting outside the law, which makes it unlawful.
Is it lawful for the state now to block a citizen who's demanding their rights, who's demanding the state to abide by the Constitution, who's demanding the state to respect the Constitution? Is it lawful for the state to block me as a citizen who's demanding my right from them? Okay,
like I said, the question of whether it's lawful or not is whether it's within the limitation of rights in terms of Section 86. It provides instances where the rights and the liberties of an individual can be limited in terms of the law. Anything outside the concept or the scope of Section 86 is unlawful, right? So there are situations, there are two general situations whereby a rights of an individual can be limited in terms of the law. The first one is the limitation clause, Section 86, and then the other one is where there are other people's rights involved. You see, rights can limit each other. And then, of course, the common excuse that the state always gives is that we are out of resources, or we do not have resources to enforce the same. So, however, the resources excuse now comes when you have an obligation to fulfill. I do not think to respect a right needs resources, really, because it's a matter of refraining, giving someone a platform to exercise their rights, to express themselves if they need to petition if they need to. You just refrain. State agencies, state authorities, they just refrain. That's respecting. Fulfillment, of course, if you have to fulfill maybe let's say the right to shelter, you can say, of course, we don't have adequate resources to build houses for people, right? That's an excuse that you can make. But in terms of respecting, my understanding is that it doesn't take resources to refrain and give someone the platform to exercise their right.
So now, what's the legal route now that doctors can take now going forward?
Like I said, like they can proceed in terms of Section 50, subsection 7D. If I have to read it verbatim to you, it states that if there are reasonable grounds to believe that a person is being detained illegally, or if it is not possible to ascertain the whereabouts of a detained person, any person, take note, any person, right, may approach the High Court for an order. In this case, any person, anyone who is concerned, it can be the doctors themselves, the association themselves, or it can be the family members, it can be anyone. They can, but the relevant court is the High Court. You approach High Court for an order habeas corpus. Habeas corpus simply means they have the body, right? That is to say, an order requiring the detained person to be released or to be brought before the court for the lawfulness of the detention to be justified, or requiring the whereabouts of the detained person to be disclosed. So I think the legal route that's available is to proceed in terms of Section 50 and apply for an order, which will now impose the obligation on the police to make sure that they work within their powers to ascertain the whereabouts of Dr. Makombe.
However, Mr. Robi, is it lawful, again, I might ask, would someone is abducted in the middle of the night, then they come and say they don't know who abducted them? It's not them, it's not the government, it's not the state, it's the third force. Is it lawful? Can you say it's a proper government? Can you say it's a proper state which is not lying, not taking responsibility for anything, saying we don't know anything about this thing? Is the third force? Which third force are they talking about? We don't know exactly. So, is it proper?
I stated it at the commencement of this interaction that there is nothing lawful about abduction. As I said, it's a behavior or an international crime, rather, a crime that is frowned upon by the international community, and we as a country are part of that international community. So the question of whether it's lawful to adopt someone, there is nothing lawful about the adoption. However, on the part of the government saying we do not know, they are justified to say that because these are allegations. No one has direct evidence or primary evidence to, so to say, or so to prove that it's the government, it's the state authorities that kidnapped or that adopted a certain person, a certain individual. So what they simply did is to distance themselves from the adoption, from taking the responsibility of saying we are the ones who adopted Dr. Makombe. That's, of course, they are within the law. They have that right to say, no, we do not take responsibility. We are not the ones who did it, right? However, still, in terms of the Constitution, they have the responsibility that they cannot run away from, to make sure that is whereabouts, because it is their duty to protect. Remember our Section 44, the one that I read to, which imposes the state upon the which imposes the duty upon the state as the primary primary duty bearer of enforcing and respecting and promoting the human rights. So they have a duty to protect the Dr. Magombe in this regard. In as much as they cannot say we are the ones who did it, they still have an obligation to make sure that his whereabouts are ascertained. At the end of the day, the response to your answer is that the state has a right in law to say we didn't do it, right? However, they still have an obligation in terms of Section 44 of the Constitution to carry out investigations, carry out efforts to ascertain his whereabouts, who did it, right? They can't just allege that there is a third hand in this. They should take steps in terms of the law. They have that obligation because they have an obligation to protect their citizens. So they should take steps, serious steps, to make sure that he is at least found or released. Whether he's dead or alive, that's another thing. But his whereabouts should be ascertained. Yes.
Now let's move on to look at Section 65, labor rights. Every person has a right to fair and safe labor practices and standards, and to be paid a fair and reasonable wage. So now the doctors, they've down tools. The president of doctors was protesting because of the living conditions that they were given, the low wages that they were getting. So now, want to link what they did to this right. Were they okay? Were they correct for them to protest and demand their rights to be respected?
Yes, the fact that this abduction comes after maybe a series of protesting, of saying we are not going to carry out the work under these prevailing conditions or under these poor labor conditions. They had that right in terms of law. Section 65, as you read it out, it entitles everyone, every employee. And when you look at this, doctors are generally employees of the government. So in as much as they are employees, the law provides the rights and duties for both the employer, whether it's within the private or public sector. Here we are talking about the public sector, right? It provides entitlements for both the employer and the employee. So the doctors, to answer you, were within their rights to demand a friendly and effective working environment. You need wages. If the wages were low and they felt that they were low, they had the right in terms of the Constitution, in terms of the labor rights clause in the Constitution, to protest, to demonstrate, so that they demand reasonable conditions or improved conditions, labor conditions, that is.
At some point, the doctors said they wanted their wages to be increased. And then the Vice President Chiwenga fired I think nurses then, he fired them. Was that a gross human rights violation? As doctors were demanding our rights to be increased, and someone to look at our working conditions, but now we're being fired. Was that a gross human rights violation, and what was done then?
What we must appreciate is that we live in a constitutional democracy. The impact or the meaning of that is everything that is done by the government or by anyone else, whether in the public or private sector, it must be justified by the law and by the Constitution. So if the VP took a step to fire the doctors for protesting, or to fire the nurses for protesting, then the question is, what authority, what basis was he using? If he was using any other law, then at the end of the day, we have a hierarchy of laws, and the Constitution is the supreme law. Any law, if you read Section 2, which is the supremacy clause, states that any law which is inconsistent with the Constitution is inconsistent to the extent of its inconsistency. It's invalid to the extent of its consistency. So the biggest question is, did the VP act based on any justifiable law? If his conduct or his decision was backed by the law, then we can say that he acted lawfully. If he wasn't, then there was a violation. But a violation can't cure itself. There are remedies, there are certain steps that you need. If you feel a decision taken by state agencies or state authorities is unlawful or violates a certain human right, there are courts, there are constitutional, there is constitutional court, there are high courts to approach and try and enforce those fundamental human rights. And the spectrum, the locus standi in judicial, right, is a bit wide in the context of the new constitution. Anyone now, most of the people are now entitled to approach the court.
Right, now, Robi, also when one right is being violated, it affects other rights under the Constitution of Zimbabwe. So now the doctor was abducted, that's a gross human rights violation, but what other rights were being violated at the same time?
Okay, normally a failure to observe one right, whether within the Constitution or within the international human rights conventions, international human rights laws, a failure to observe or to respect one right normally leads to a violation of many other subsequent rights. So at the end of the day, there are many other rights that are, at least if not directly violated, are threatened as a result or as a consequent to the adoption of Dr. Makombe. So to answer you, if you read section 49, talks about the right to personal liberty. It says that every person has the right to personal liberty, which includes the right not to be detained without a trial, the right not to be deprived of their liberty arbitrarily or without a just cause. So an adoption amounts to a taking away of an individual's freedom. So it is a violation of that right. Abduction, apart from infringing the obvious rights like section 65, right, the other rights that we've discussed, it does impact on section 49, which talks about the right to personal liberty. You also observe there is a right to personal right to human dignity. That's section 51, right, of the Constitution, which, of course, if I read it verbatim to you, it says that every person has inherent dignity in their private and public life, right? So at the end of the day, that right has to be respected and protected. That's the Constitution. So at the end of the day, this right, there is, when you kidnap someone or when you adopt someone, you are indeed violating their right to human dignity. Their freedom to demonstrate there or to petition is obviously a directly infringed right, a right there in the Constitution. And then you also talk about the obvious freedom of expression. If you are not happy, the law entitles you to express yourself fully, okay? And then that right cannot be limited just by adopting someone or by adopting you. So there are other many rights that are indirectly or directly affected by conduct of kidnapping or adopting one, that is to say.
Right, Robi, thanks so much for your time. Thanks for joining us for this show.
Okay, you're welcome.
There you have it. That was Brian Robi from Tanaka Law Chambers discussing the issue of the Dr. Peter Makombe was abducted on Saturday evening, and by the state forces, as they say, by the third forces, as they say. And we are still talking about the human rights violations that are happening in Zimbabwe. And please do watch Know Your Right. Do follow us on Twitter, CITEZW. Do follow me to the Prefecture. And until next time, know your right.